The clock on the wall ticked. Each second felt like a drop of water, slow, heavy. It was 10:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. The world outside was a curtain of black rain, headlights smeared across the wet asphalt. Inside, the Starbucks was my own private island, an island smelling of burnt coffee and lemon loaf. I was alone. The last customer had left an hour ago. A woman with a tired face and a dripping umbrella. Now it was just me and the hum of the refrigerators. The hum was a constant friend on these late shifts, a low, steady drone that kept the real silence away, the silence that felt like something was listening. I wiped down the counters for the third time, a nervous habit. Streaks of cleaning solution caught the dim light. I saw my reflection in the polished steel of the espresso machine, a pale face, dark circles under my eyes. I looked like a ghost haunting my own workplace. The chairs were all stacked on the tables, their legs pointed to the ceiling like accusing fingers. Everything was clean, everything was in its place. The routine was a comfort. It was a shield against the weirdness of the night. It told me that everything was normal, that I was safe. But tonight, normal felt very far away. The rain beat against the large front windows, a frantic, desperate rhythm. It was the only sound besides the humming machines. I imagined faces in the patterns of the water running down the glass, distorted, screaming faces. I shook my head trying to clear it. Too much caffeine, too little sleep. I told myself that's all it was. The store was a glass box. Anyone could look in. I always felt exposed on the late shift, a lone goldfish in a bowl. Tonight, that feeling was a cold weight in my stomach, a premonition, a tiny nagging voice that whispered I was not as alone as I thought. My tasks were almost done. Mop the floor, take out the trash, lock the doors. Then I could go home. Home to my small apartment with its creaky floors and noisy neighbors. It felt like paradise compared to this sterile, silent space. I looked at the door, the heavy glass door with the green Starbucks logo. It was locked. I had locked it myself at 10 p.m., a small comfort. But locks only keep honest people out. The thought sent a fresh shiver down my spine. I grabbed the mop, the wooden handle feeling solid and real in my hands. It was time to finish. It was time to get out. That's when I saw him. He was just there, sitting in the corner booth, the one partially hidden by a large potted plant. My heart did a painful leap in my chest. It felt like it hit my ribs. How did he get in? The door was locked. The bell on the door hadn't chimed. He was just there, as if he had materialized from the shadows themselves. He wore a simple gray hoodie. The hood was pulled up, casting his face in deep shadow. He was staring down at the table, perfectly still, not a twitch, not a sound. He looked like a statue, a very unsettling statue. I stood frozen behind the counter. The mop handle was slick with sweat in my hand. My mind raced. Had he been there the whole time, hiding, sleeping in the booth? No, I would have seen him. I was meticulous. I checked every corner when I cleaned. I always did. So how? How did he get in? The back door was locked too. I checked it myself. The panic started to bubble up in my throat. It tasted like metal. I told myself to be calm. Maybe he was a homeless person who had snuck in before I locked up. Maybe he just needed a place to stay out of the rain. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I had to handle this. I was the manager on duty. It was my responsibility. I put the mop down. My hands were shaking. I forced them to be still. "Sir?" I called out. My voice was a weak tremor in the quiet room. It sounded small, scared. He didn't move. He didn't look up. It was like he hadn't heard me at all. Or maybe he was ignoring me. The thought was somehow worse. The silence stretched. It was thick, suffocating. I could hear my own blood pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat of fear. I decided to try again, louder this time, more assertive. "Sir, we're closed," I said. The words came out stronger than I expected. "You need to leave." Still nothing. He remained completely motionless, a figure carved from stone. The shadow from his hood was so deep, I couldn't make out a single feature of his face. It was a black void, a hole where a face should be. The rain hammered against the glass. The refrigerators hummed their endless song, and the man in the corner sat, silent, still, waiting. But waiting for what? I didn't want to know. I had to get closer. I knew I had to. I couldn't just stand behind the counter all night. I had to make him leave. I took a step out from behind my fortress of steel and coffee makers. The floor felt vast and empty. Each step was a cannon shot in the silence. I walked slowly, cautiously, as if I were approaching a wild animal. My eyes were locked on the hooded figure. I watched for any sign of movement, a twitch, a breath. There was nothing. The air grew colder as I approached his corner, or maybe it was just the fear icing my veins. I stopped a few feet from his table. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely a whisper. This time he moved. His head lifted slowly. so slowly. It was a deliberate, almost theatrical gesture. I still couldn't see his face. The deep hood and the dim lighting conspired to keep him a mystery. But I could feel his eyes on me. A heavy physical pressure, like two hands pressing against my chest. I couldn't breathe. My training manual had a section on difficult customers. It did not have a section for this. For the feeling of being prey. Then he spoke. His voice was low, raspy, like sand scraping against stone. "A coffee," he said. Just 2 words. It wasn't a question. It was a command. My mind short-circuited. Coffee? We were closed. The machines were off. Everything was clean. I opened my mouth to explain this, to tell him no, to tell him to get out. But the words wouldn't come. The sheer strangeness of the situation had stolen them. Here was a man who had appeared from nowhere, a man who radiated a quiet menace, and he wanted a coffee. A part of me wanted to scream, to run for the back room and lock the door, to call the police. But another part of me, a part that was paralyzed by fear, decided to just obey. It seemed like the safest option, the path of least resistance. Maybe if I just gave him what he wanted, he would leave. It was a simple request after all, just a coffee. "Okay," I heard myself say. The word felt like a betrayal, a surrender. I turned my back on him. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Every nerve in my body screamed that it was a mistake. Walking back to the counter was an eternity. My back was a giant target. I felt his unseen gaze on me. I expected to feel a hand on my shoulder, to hear a sudden noise, to feel a sharp pain. My muscles were coiled so tight they ached. I reached the relative safety of the counter and leaned against it, my legs weak. I had to turn the espresso machine back on. The loud clank of the switch being flipped echoed in the store. It sounded like a gunshot. I flinched. My hands fumbled as I grabbed a paper cup. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. I worked on autopilot. The familiar motions were a small comfort, a flimsy shield against the terror. Grind the beans, tamp the espresso, lock the portafilter into place. The machine hissed and gurgled. It was a normal sound, a sound I had heard thousands of times, but tonight it sounded alien. Wrong. I kept glancing over my shoulder, towards the corner. He hadn't moved. He was in the exact same position, head down again, as if the last few minutes hadn't happened, as if he hadn't spoken, as if I wasn't making him a coffee in a closed store in the middle of the night. The rich smell of espresso filled the air. Usually I loved that smell. It meant morning. It meant energy. It meant life. Tonight, it smelled like dread. I poured the steamed milk, my hand shaking so much that the foam art was just a messy white blob. It didn't matter. I doubted he cared about latte art. I put a lid on the cup. The snap of the plastic felt final. I had done what he asked. Now what? Would he pay? Would he just take it and leave? Or was this just the beginning of something much worse? The questions swirled in my head, a dizzying vortex of fear. I placed the cup on the counter. "Your coffee," I called out, my voice thin. I didn't want to walk it over to him. I didn't want to get that close again. I wanted him to come to me, to come into the light. He didn't move for a long moment. The silence returned, heavier than before. Then, slowly, he pushed himself up from the booth. He was tall, taller than I had realized. He moved with a strange, fluid grace, not at all like someone who had been sitting still for so long. He started walking towards the counter. Each step was a slow, deliberate beat in the rhythm of my own terrified heart. He reached the counter. He didn't look at the coffee, he looked at me. I still couldn't see his face, just the black void under the hood, but I could feel his eyes. They were burning into me. He didn't reach for his wallet, he just stood there, silent. The air crackled with an unspoken threat. The hum of the refrigerator seemed to get louder, or maybe it was the blood rushing in my ears. I wanted to tell him the price, to pretend this was a normal transaction, but my throat was closed. The words were trapped behind a wall of pure terror. Then his hand came up. It was fast, a blur of motion. I flinched back, a strangled cry escaping my lips. I thought he was going to reach for me, to grab me across the counter. But he didn't. His hand shot out and slammed down on the glass display case next to the register, the one filled with sad, day-old pastries. The sound was explosive, a sharp, violent crack that shattered the silence. I screamed, a real lung-tearing scream this time. The glass didn't break completely. A spiderweb of fractures spread out from the point of impact. A star of shattered glass. He didn't say a word. He just left his hand there, pressed against the cracked glass. I stared at his hand. It was pale. His fingers were long and thin. There was a tattoo on his wrist, a small dark shape. I couldn't make it out. My mind was a whirlwind of panic. This wasn't about coffee, it was never about coffee, this was something else. Something violent and unpredictable. He was showing me what he could do. He was showing me how easily he could break things. How easily he could break me. My training, my composure, everything shattered along with that glass. I fumbled for the phone under the counter. My fingers slipped on the smooth plastic. I had to call 911. I had to get help. He saw the movement, his head tilted, a small, curious gesture, like a bird watching a worm. He slowly lifted his hand from the glass. He turned it over, examining his knuckles as if he were surprised by his own strength. Then, he looked back at me, and he took a step towards the gap at the end of the counter, the gap that led to where I was, the gap that offered no protection. My fingers finally found the buttons on the phone, 911. I pressed them, my thumb shaking. I didn't even put the phone to my ear. I just dropped it on the counter, hoping the dispatcher could hear, hoping they could hear my ragged breathing, my frantic whimpers. The man kept coming. He was moving slowly, deliberately, savoring my fear. He rounded the end of the counter. There was nothing between us now but a few feet of tiled floor. The smell of burnt coffee and my own terror filled the small space behind the bar. There was nowhere to run. I backed away, pressing myself against the cold steel of the back counter. My hand knocked over a stack of cups. They clattered to the floor, a loud, pathetic noise. He didn't even flinch. His focus was entirely on me. I could see a little more of his face now, the sharp line of a jaw, the pale skin, but his eyes were still lost in the shadows of the hood. "Please," I whispered, "please, just take the money, take anything." It was a useless plea. I knew this wasn't about money. It was about power. It was about the pleasure of seeing me so completely and utterly terrified. He stopped right in front of me. He was so close I could feel the warmth from his body. I could smell the damp wool of his hoodie. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear to look at the shadowed space where his face should be. I braced myself, for a blow, for a grab, for the cold touch of a weapon. The silence was absolute. The rain had stopped, the refrigerators had fallen silent, their cooling cycle complete. There was only the sound of my own frantic heartbeat, a drum pounding out the last seconds of my life. I waited, and then there was a sound. Not from him, from outside. A loud crash, the sound of metal on metal, followed by shouting, angry, muffled voices. The man in front of me went rigid. His head snapped towards the front of the store. He was distracted. For a single blessed second, his attention was not on me. His body was tense, poised, like an animal that has heard the hunters approach. The shouting outside grew louder, more frantic. It wasn't the sound of police, it was something else, something chaotic and violent. The distraction was my only chance. I didn't think. I just acted. A primal instinct for survival took over. I dropped to the floor, scrambling on my hands and knees. I crawled under the counter towards the back room. My knees scraped against the rough tile. The space was tight, filled with discarded sugar packets and straw wrappers. I didn't care. It was a tunnel to safety. I could hear him moving above me. A soft shuffle of feet. Was he coming after me? I pushed myself faster, my breath coming in ragged sobs. I reached the door to the back room and scrambled inside. I slammed the heavy door shut. I fumbled for the lock. A deadbolt. I threw it. The solid thud of the bolt sliding into place was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. I pressed my back against the door, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. I was safe, for now. The back room was dark. It smelled of bleach and garbage. I could hear the sounds from the front of the store, muffled by the door. The shouting outside had stopped, but now there were new sounds. Loud bangs against the front windows, not like fists, heavier, sicker. Through the small, diamond-shaped window in the back room door, I could see a sliver of the store. It was bathed in flashing lights, red and blue. The police. They were here. Relief washed over me in a wave so powerful my knees almost buckled. The dispatcher must have heard. They must have sent help. The bangs on the front windows continued. 3 more. 4. Then the sound of shattering glass. Not a crack this time. A complete catastrophic explosion of glass. The entire front wall of the store seemed to come crashing down. I heard shouting from the police. "Drop your weapon! Get on the ground!" They weren't shouting at the man in the hoodie. Their voices were directed outside, towards whatever was making that noise. I risked a peek through the small window. I could see the man in the gray hoodie. He was standing in the middle of the store. He hadn't come after me. He was just standing there, watching the chaos at the front, and then he did something that made no sense. He slowly pulled a police badge from his pocket. He held it up, and he started walking towards the shattered front of the store, towards the other cops. I stayed pressed against the door, my mind unable to process what I was seeing. A cop? The man who had terrorized me, who had smashed the counter, who had cornered me. He was a cop? It didn't make sense. The pieces didn't fit. I heard more shouting. Then, a different sound, a low, guttural growl. It wasn't human, it was deep and animalistic. It sent a new wave of fear through me, a fear that was colder and deeper than before. The monster I thought I was hiding from was a cop. So what was the real monster? I crept to the window again. My terror was now mixed with a morbid curiosity. I had to see. The front of the store was gone, the window frames were twisted and broken. Police officers were crouched behind their cars, and in the middle of the wreckage, illuminated by the flashing lights, were two figures. They were fighting. Or rather, one was attacking, and the other was defending. The attacker was huge, inhumanly so. It was hunched over, its limbs long and twisted. It moved with a terrifying speed and brutality. It was the source of the growling. The other figure was the man in the gray hoodie, the undercover cop. He was moving with a speed and agility that matched the creature. He wasn't trying to shoot it, he was dodging, weaving, holding something in his hand. A small silver object that glinted in the flashing lights. It wasn't a gun. The creature lunged. The cop sidestepped, and I saw what he did. He pressed the silver object against the creature's side. There was a flash of white light, a high-pitched scream that tore through the night. It was a sound of pure agony, and it wasn't human. The creature stumbled back, it writhed on the wet pavement, smoke rose from its side. The other officers moved in then, not with guns but with heavy chains and a large reinforced net. They worked with a practiced efficiency. They subdued the writhing thing. It was fast. It was brutal. It was terrifying. I realized then what I had stumbled into. The man in the hoodie wasn't just an undercover cop. He was part of something else. He wasn't hunting criminals, he was hunting monsters. And he had used my store and my fear as bait. They came to the back room door eventually, a woman in a sharp black suit. She wasn't a regular cop. She spoke to me in a calm, quiet voice. She explained nothing, and everything. She told me I had been very brave. She said the man in the hoodie was a hero. She said it was important for national security that I never speak of what I saw. The creature, the silver object, any of it. They had a story prepared. A gas line explosion, a tragic accident. The damage to the store was extensive. It would back up the story. My silence was not a request. It was an order. The man in the hoodie, the undercover agent, I never saw his face. He was gone before the woman in the suit came to me. They cleaned everything up. By sunrise, the shattered glass was swept away. Boarded-up windows covered the front of the store. It looked like any other unfortunate accident. They gave me a thick envelope of cash. For my trouble, they said. For a new start. A way to ensure I would go away and stay quiet. I took it. I walked out of the back of the building as the sun came up and I never went back. I moved to a new city. I got a new job, an office job, no more night shifts. No more glass walls that make you feel like you're on display. I live in a world of cubicles and spreadsheets now. It's boring, it's predictable. And I love it. I crave the mundane. I find comfort in the ordinary, because I know what hides in the shadows. I know that sometimes the person you think is the monster is actually the one protecting you from something far, far worse. He terrorized me, yes, but he also saved me. He used my fear as a shield. Sometimes at night, when it's too quiet, I think about him. The man in the gray hoodie. I think about the real monsters that walk in the rain. I think about the thin line between the world I know and the world that I saw for just one terrifying night. I lock my doors. I check them twice. I don't like to be alone in quiet places. The memory of that night is a scar. It doesn't hurt anymore, but it's always there. A reminder that the world is not